Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. So my name is Adilka, and I am a lead organizer with Make the Road Action. I wanted to take the time to thank everyone for being in the room today and for Senator Sanders for meeting with us to talk about ending the school-to-prison and deportation pipeline. We have a room full of directly impacted youth, a room with a lot of folks who hold knowledge, and individuals who are collectively organizing every day to shift the current world we live in to be inclusive, full of dignity, and where communities feel safe because they get to decide what safety means to them. I wanted to acknowledge the following organizations that are in the room. So Make the Road Action is in the room, representing Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Long Island, and other parts of New York. Leaders Igniting Transformation Action Fund are here all the way from Milwaukee. Latinos Unidos Siempre from Salem, Oregon are also in the room. Make the Road Connecticut from Bridgeport is also here. The Baltimore Algebra Project and Baltimore Intersection from Baltimore are also here, as well as Rockaway Youth Task Force Fund from Queens, New York. I also wanted to acknowledge the Center for Popular Democracy Action and the Alliance for Educational Justice for helping to organize today's Youth Roundtable. The criminalization of youth of color in schools is not just a New York City-based issue. It is an issue millions of young people are grappling with every day throughout the country. You will probably remember when you called into our convention back in July that a youth organizer from Pittsburgh asked you if you would be willing to sit down and talk to young people around the school-to-prison pipeline and our plans to dismantle it.
And what did I say?
I said yes.
And am I here?
And you here,
No,
yes you are. You sure are. Beginning with our youth mandate that has been endorsed and supported by over 150 organizations, I want it to be understood that the people sitting around this table today are more than just students and youth of color and youth leaders. They are organizers who are working to dismantle the school-to-prison and deportation pipeline every day and will continue to do that even after this meeting. You see, we understand why police are in schools. Police were introduced in schools as a direct response to Black and Latinx and students of color exercising and demanding their rights and access to education. In 1957, a New York City Council committee was set up to explore juvenile justice and recommended a police officer in every single school. But the sole focus seemed to be getting them in schools with Black and Latinx youth. Baltimore City Schools created their own police force in 1967 during the heart of the civil rights movement. In 1968, hundreds of officers met and brutalized Chicano students who staged a walkout in protest to organize for their right to an adequate education. In 2003, I was sexually harassed by a police officer inside of my school, and so were many other girls. Years later, we see police officers dragging young Black girls by their hair and throwing them from their chairs. We are here today to reiterate that police in schools have never been about safety. It is about control, oppression, and denying young people of color the right to advocate for the education they deserve. The school-to-prison and deportation pipeline is feeding Black and brown young people and their families to the very unforgiving mass incarceration system and into the cruel system of immigration enforcement and deportations. Young people are here today to share their experiences. This is the start of an ongoing conversation to get you to understand where they are, especially because we believe there's a lot of alignment between our youth mandate and your campaign platforms. For example, we were happy to see in your Thurgood Marshall plan for public education, you specifically state that we must end the school-to-prison pipeline, and you make a number of important policy commitments toward ending racial discrimination in our education system. And again, we appreciate you for taking the time to talk to us today. So thank you and welcome. We're excited to talk about that and able to be strategically moving forward with everyone, including accountability to the folks in this room and the communities represented. So can folks help me and just a round of applause for Mr. Senator Bernie Sanders. And this is for you if you want it.
Good.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, not only for inviting me to be with you, but for all of the efforts that you're undertaking. Let me be very blunt and say this. The younger generation in this country today is the most progressive younger generation in the history of this country. You should be proud of that. It's a generation that is anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobia, anti-religious bigotry, It's a generation that has led the fight for common sense gun safety legislation. It's a generation that is leading the world to take on the very, very serious crisis of climate change. That is extraordinary.
Yeah.
All right? That's the good news. The bad news is that your generation, people under 30, do not vote in the kind of numbers that they should. And if people under 30 voted at the same level as people 65 or older, you know what? We would transform this country. And that means not only defeating Trump and his racism, it means guaranteeing health care to all people. It means real criminal justice reform so that our young people are not ending up in jail, but are ending up in college or in trade schools learning the skills that they need. So one of the things that we are trying to do in this campaign, we're spending a lot of time and money, and we look forward to working with you, is to bring young people into the political process in a way that we have never seen before. And above and beyond all of the issues that we're talking about here, all of the important issues, there's another issue. And that is, everything being equal, unless we change the way the economy works, your generation will have a lower standard of living than your parents. The wages that you earn when you go out and get a job will be less than your parents. The housing costs that you incur will be higher than your parents. And many of you are going to leave school with a heavy dose of student debt. All right? So those are some of the issues. We got enormous problems facing this country in terms of criminal justice, in terms of healthcare, in terms of immigration, in terms of climate change. If we don't get our act together boldly on climate change, the world that your kids and grandchildren will be living in will be increasingly unhealthy and uninhabitable. And that is a fact. So we got a lot of work to do, and I salute you for jumping into the political process and standing up and fighting for justice. That's exactly what everybody in this country has got to do. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So to get us started, Twyla, who's a young person, a youth leader from Make the Road Action, and Vinny, a youth leader from Latinos Unidos Siempre in Oregon, are going to present together. So there's a presentation first and then a question, and then we'll allow you to respond afterwards.
Hi, good morning. How are you? I've done a lot of work organizing during high school to dismantle. Oh, okay. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I've done a lot of work during high school organizing to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline and to change the approaches of the school climate to encourage the use of restorative justice, as well as bringing focus on school, emotional, and mental health. I want to thank you for being one of the people to not only bring attention to it, but for also mentioning it throughout your campaign. We believe, as well as our history and our experiences continue to show us, that you can't have police, metal detectors, drug-sniffing dogs, and dehumanizing security measures in schools, and that we need to immediately change school climate to focus more on the needs of students and ensure racial justice. Growing up in an underfunded community as a young woman of color, I have seen that the school-to-prison pipeline directly affects many of the peers in my community. Disbursing young people into paths to jails and deportation. Racial justice and social, emotional, and mental health support cannot coexist with policing and harsh punishments. Policing and security is not what keeps or builds safe and supportive school communities. After almost $1 billion spent by the federal government to fund SROs and security, there is no evidence police or metal detectors make schools any safer. 1 million students attend a school with a full-time police officer and no guidance counselor. Pouring money into training police officers is not going to address the fundamental issue that is that police don't and won't make us safe. Strong relationships with teachers, restorative justice practices, social, emotional, and mental health support is what will keep us safe. We have to redefine safety, and to do that, we need people to listen to what we need.
Okay. Hello, Senator. Hello, Senator. Okay. Well, I'm nervous.
Nothing to be nervous of.
I'm gonna tell you my story. When I was in 3rd grade, a teacher called the cops on me because she didn't feel safe.
When you were in the 3rd grade?
Yeah, I was in 3rd grade. The cops came in and handcuffed me really hard. They always handcuffed kids until it was hurt, especially students with special education needs. They took me to the juvenile detention. My mom was a single mom and worked a lot. I stayed there until she could pick me up at 11 o'clock at night. I was an 8-year-old kid with PTSD and anxiety. I need support. I'm not to be incarcerated. When I was in middle school, I would have to check in with the cop every day to see if I followed the dress code. I often felt because my mom couldn't afford to buy me new clothes. This led me to be suspended over and over again until I was expelled. Even though I worked hard to get connected to the education, I continued to be pushed out of schools. 2 months ago, I was expelled from my school. My school was supposed to send me a notice and give me an opportunity to tell my story, but they never did. This issue has affected many people in my community. My cousin has been out of the criminal justice system since he was in middle school. He is now serving 15 years in prison. He was only 16 years old. He was tried as an adult. One shocking thing is that some cops that he knew from middle school arrested him as an adult, called him by his first name, as if he knew that he was going to end up in prison. We are getting policed everywhere. This can lead to school-to-deportation pipeline. 2 years ago, a young person from my area had to go to court from the juvenile detention. After the hearing, he and his mom were taken by ICE. Oregon has a sanctuary policy, but if you send young people into prisons and courts, ICE will find them and their families. I strongly believe that police shouldn't be in schools. They're always profiling black and brown youth, and they always escalate situations when they really just need to support. I would rather have a counselor that looks like me and comes from a similar background. I hope you listen to all our stories today and allow this to impact how you can take this issue. I need a president who will listen to us and respect what we need and then put in the work to end the school-to-prison and deportation pipeline. Oh, I'm not done. I have the question.
All
Well, y'all, stop it. Chill. Hold up, I gotta flip. You said that we needed to end the school-to-prison pipeline. The only way to do that is if we have police-free schools. Will you support our vision for police-free schools? And will you divest all federal funds from policing in schools, which includes ending the cop's office that has been the single biggest source of federal funding for the police in schools?
Okay. Thank you both for your comments. And can we do a little bit, I'm going to give an answer. Can I ask some questions and we do a little discussion? Do we have time to do that or not?
What do you think? Not as much?
Okay. Well, we have, there's so much to discuss here. We have, as a nation, more people in jail than any other country on earth, including China, which is 4 times our size. People in jail are disproportionately black and brown and Native American. So when we talk about the pipeline from school to jail, what we are talking about are school districts, black and brown, Native American school districts that are underfunded, where kids are not getting the attention that they need, are not getting the guidance counselors that they need, don't have the kind of support staff that they need. So what I think is that instead of building more jails and having more people in jail, we already got 2 million people in jail, I think we're going to invest in our schools and in job training. So that if young people in school have the education that they need to go out and get a good job, if young people in school right now have the ability to get a higher education, because we're going to make public colleges and universities tuition free, if they have the counseling that they need, rather than just law enforcement in the buildings, this will go an enormously long way to end the school to jail pipeline. So in other words, we're going to invest in schools. Our educational program calls for a tripling of funding in Title I schools, a tripling of funding. That means you will have the guidance counselors that you need. It means that teachers will be able to spend time with the kids. And instead of investing in law enforcement, we invest in educators who make sure, and I want to say this, I want just a brief comment from you. Tell me if you think I'm right or wrong. My worry is that all over this country, in low-income communities, kids are falling through the cracks. Falling through the cracks. In other words, they're a junior in high school, they're looking around them, and they're going to drop out of school. Well, if you drop out of school and you don't have a good education, the future is not too good in most cases. Is that true or is that not true? Am I missing something here? Please give me an answer here. Do you know kids who are dropping out, getting into trouble? All right, anyone want to comment on that? All right, so our goal is to make sure. There was a teacher in my state of Vermont, and this is what she said. She's a high school principal, not a teacher, principal, Southern Vermont. And she said, I love the kids in my school. She did. And she said, I am not going to let those kids drop out. And we're going to have mentors, and we're going to do everything. If the kid calls up at 3 o'clock in the morning because there's a family crisis, or they're breaking up with their girlfriend or the boyfriend, I'm there. We're there. We're not going to let these kids drop out because we love them. And I think as a nation, if we do that, if we say to the kids, we are with you, we're going to give you the support that you need, you can go a very, very long way to end this school-to-prison pipeline, which has got to be broken. And the other thing that we do, by the way, is we're going to end the war on drugs. All right? The war on drugs has been incredibly destructive, especially to black and brown communities. We're going to legalize marijuana in every state in this country. We're going to expunge the records of those people who have been arrested for marijuana. I'll tell you what else we're going to do. If you go to states, as I have, like California and Nevada, where marijuana is legal, the people who are making the money by selling legal marijuana are large corporations. We have a plan to help black and brown business people get into the business of selling legal marijuana, because we think the people who should benefit from the legalization of marijuana are the communities that have suffered the most. Does that make sense to people? Okay.
Yeah, yes, and definitely agree with all you're saying. And we understand that the school-to-prison pipeline, it's an education but also a racial justice issue. But we also understand that we cannot end the school-to-prison pipeline until we fully remove police from schools. And we know it's been done, right? Canada, which is somewhere that you've referenced before in the past, to healthcare, for instance,
Yes.
Have removed SROs or school resource officers from their largest school district. So we know it's something possible. We know it's not a radical idea. We know it's very common sense. So just, do you think police-free schools is a vision that you can be convinced of?
I think it's a vision. I'm not sure that it'll take place in every school tomorrow, but I would like to see police officers, and most of the, help me out here, are most of the officers in your schools, the schools you're familiar with, uniformed officers? They in uniform usually?
Yeah, they're trained by NYPD.
And they're trained by, in this city, they're by the NYPD?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I would much prefer to see counselors in there who you feel comfortable with, who you feel are on your side. Okay.
Okay, I think the last question I'll ask on that, we understand that there was a bulk of the 94 crime bill that you're willing and ready to repeal. The COPS office was created there, and there's been over $1 billion that have been funneled into really increasing policing. Is that something that you feel, will you shut that office down and reinvest those funds to end racist, like policing and stuff in schools?
We are going, look, right now, I was just the other day in New Hampshire, which, by the way, is a white state. Do you know what the starting salary for a teacher is in some school districts in New Hampshire? It's $28,000. Pathetic. You got teachers working 2 or 3 jobs. All right. What we need is to have, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Anybody here from Brooklyn?
Hello.
All right, okay. I went to PS 197 on Kings Highway and 23rd Street. I went to James Madison High School. Anybody go to James Madison or know of James Madison? All right. Yeah. And I had an excellent education, as a matter of fact, public school education. What we need to do is invest our money, and we're going to do that, big time. We should have the best public educational system in the world. We should have an excellent pre-K, childcare system. We're going to make public colleges and universities tuition-free and we're going to cancel student debt, which means that anybody in America, regardless of their income, will be able to get a higher education. So to answer your question, no, I don't want to invest in cops. I want to invest in teachers. I want to invest in support staff, so you have nurses in your schools, you have librarians in your schools, you have social workers in your schools. That's where the investment has to be made. But the bottom line here is we have to invest in the young people of this country. And I got to say to you, frankly, your generation has gotten a raw deal. We have one of the highest rates of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. And all of this stuff takes us to another issue, is that we have more income and wealth inequality. So we have to ask ourselves how, at a time when 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America, how do we not have enough money to invest in our kids and our schools?
All the money's there. It's
The
just
money is
where
there.
It is.
This
Yeah.
is the richest country in the history of the world. So if we were a poor country, we would have another kind of discussion. We are a very rich country. So instead of investing in the military-industrial complex, instead of giving subsidies and tax breaks to coal companies and oil companies who are destroying our planet, we should be investing in our children, in our elderly people, and in the real needs facing working class people in this country.
Thank you. Now I'm going to pass it over to Roshanti, a youth leader from Leaders Igniting Transformation in Milwaukee, who will also be asking you a question. Can I have the mic, please? The mic? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about Roshanti's question.
Hi, Senator Sanders. I'm here to share our vision for schools that are free from metal detectors, surveillance cameras, and facial recognition software. All of the technology that criminalizes us every day, both in and out of schools, I felt dehumanized walking through metal detectors every morning. I felt like I was walking into a prison. They would go through my bag. People would have to spread their arms and legs and get pat down. And these the same police that put us in danger. A few months ago, a student pulled a senior prank, ended up in the hospital because an officer bashed his head in. It feels horrible going through these metal detectors with cops all around. All I wanted to do was learn. We just defeated a school board proposal that would have spent money on installing more invasive X-ray machines in our school that were sold to jails and border patrols. In Milwaukee, the winters are cold, really cold. It regularly gets below 0. In the morning, we would have to wait outside, sometimes for 2 hours, as they would check every student. Some days, I'd even miss first or second period just because we were waiting. Studies have shown that this doesn't make us any safer. It's a waste of money and time. The money that is spent on metal detectors or other surveillance equipment could be invested in our schools. My books are falling apart. Most of our classes have more than 30 students in it, and it's a very small space. We don't have enough counselors or psychologists to support anyone. Right now, the federal government pays for surveillance equipment, including many of these devices, which control Black and brown young people. Do you think we need metal detectors and surveillance equipment in schools? And I know you have called for more funding for our schools, including for things like counselors. Will you divest federal grant programs, incentivize restorative approaches to school discipline, and fund counselors and school psychologists and social workers? The grant program should ensure funding goes to restore communities most impacted by the school-to-prison-and-deportation pipeline.
You actually waited 2 hours to get into school?
Yes, I go to Bradley Tech, and every morning they check our IDs. We wait. It's a lot of kids in that school, over 1,000. And they check our IDs. It takes us more than 2 hours sometimes to get in the door.
And they do body searches as well to pat you down?
Since I'm a female, I had to go through a female, but she goes extra and overboard with it, and they put the metal detectors in our shirts to check our bras.
Look, that is no way to start a school day, is it? And it does feel like you're entering a jail, which impacts how you feel about school. All right. So I think the point you're making is the right point. And the point is that in schools all over this country, we don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough psychologists. classroom sizes are too big. Kids don't have the guidance counselors to help them figure out what kind of college or what they're going to do after school that they need. And we're investing in too many metal detectors. So your thought is, instead of maybe metal detectors, we invest in teachers and guidance counselors, right? I agree with you, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know there's a lot of like conversation happening here, but also just, wanted to invite folks in the room, right? If you hear something you like, you can snap. Like I want y'all to also feel a part of the space because this
Can
space
I
is
ask
for
a
y'all.
question? Would you mind?
Yeah,
Let me
sure.
just, because I appreciate being here and
Yeah.
I want to learn from you because you guys are the ones who are doing the experience. What is there a danger of violence? Is there a danger of people bringing guns and knives into the school, or is that overplayed? Who wants to respond to that? Yeah.
So in our last school board meeting, we were actually talking to some of the school board members about that. And the problem with that is Milwaukee is a very high crime rate city. And some people don't take the bus. We walk to school. So think about our safety from getting to point A to point B. Right now there's vans taking students, mostly females, who are colored, and selling them to sex traffickers. So thinking, we have to walk from school and home, back and forth every day. We have to bring something to protect ourselves. Like, y'all think that it's because we're trying to shoot up a school or something? No, we have to protect ourselves. Like, we have things in lives outside of school. It's not all about that all the time. We have other struggles. Like, a school board member said that she went to a school before and the student had a pocket knife. You're telling me that that student brought a pocket knife to stab one of the kids when she could have easily did it with scissors or a pencil. She didn't have to bring that for a student. They expelled her. She was protecting herself. It's not all about the school inside. We're students. If we really wanted to do anything, we could have waited after school to do it, when everyone's leaving the building. It's not all about going into school, going to go shoot up schools, because, predominantly white people are shooting schools up. And most of these metal detectors are in black and brown schools. So I don't understand why y'all are coming at us for shooting schools or bringing weapons in, and all these private schools with more white people don't have anything. They can have their phones. They can eat beautiful lunch. They can have a good education with all these books. But when it comes to us, we have books from 1958, 2003. It is 2019, finna be 2003. That doesn't make sense.
Thank you. Just for the sake of time, we'll have to move forward, but what I will reiterate is that what we've seen historically is when there is, unfortunately, some kind of event or a mass shooting, it is our neighborhoods, black and brown neighborhoods, who receive the punitive and extreme end of measures instead of like the practices like restorative that we know we deserve. So I just wanted to also say that. For the sake of time, though, I'm going to pass it over to Muiche, who is going to ask the next question. Muiche is a youth leader with Make the Road Connecticut.
Hi, Senator Sanders. My name is Muiche, and I'm a youth leader with Make the Road Connecticut in Bridgeport. My mom and I immigrated from Zambia to America when I was really young. So this is the only home I know. I'm documented, which means there's some things.
I'm sorry, so you are documented?
Documented.
Yeah.
I'm documented, which means there are some things I can't do, and any interactions with police put me at risk. So in middle school and in high school, there were police and security present in my schools. The difference in treatment towards black and brown youth was evident. We were suspended more often, and I heard of people getting arrested. So when I see cops around, I know I have to be cautious. It's one thing to be reprimanded by a teacher, but it's another thing for law enforcement to get involved. Undocumented students can face detention and deportation for even low-level offenses. To end the school-to-deportation pipeline, we must end criminalization of youth at school. As you know, ICE has deported millions of people, young people included, ripping them from their homes, their communities. So ICE must be abolished to protect our communities. And if ICE is not immediately abolished, a directive must be issued to all immigration officials to stop them from entering schools and surrounding areas Immigration officials must also be stopped from cooperating and asking information from school districts, and school districts must be directed not to cooperate with them. Will you issue the directive to end all cooperation between ICE and schools?
I'm not that tall.
What we will do is end all ICE raids in this country, in schools and elsewhere. ICE and the Trump administration have been causing terror and fear in communities all over this country. I was in Los Angeles a few months ago talking to teachers, and nobody here is from California, I guess. In Los Angeles, the school district is about 90% children of color, and many of them are undocumented. And these kids are living in terrible fear that when they go home from school, one of their parents may not be there, all right? So we're gonna end that, and we're gonna end the deportation of folks in this country. So it's not just schools. We're gonna very much transform what ICE does, but they're not gonna be involved in the kinds of raids that are terrorizing communities today.
I will pass it over to our final question, Daquan Stokes from the Baltimore Algebra Project and The Intersection.
Hello, Senators and Senators. My name is Daquan, and I'm a student leader with the Baltimore Intersection, also representing the Baltimore Algebra Project. Okay. There are two Baltimores, and which zip code you are in determines what kind of education you receive. According to the Baltimore State School Report, schools in predominantly white schools will score significantly higher than those in black neighborhoods in a category for student wholeness. I have personally experienced both types of schools and can say that this makes sense considering the disparities in resources, discipline, and opportunities. For me to be seen as a whole means that every single part of who I am matters and is taken into consideration when making disciplinary decisions. I have sat in classrooms where white teachers have used language that reinforces the humanization of who I am as a young black man. While I respond the way I do to discrimination is erased and instead perceived as being disrespectful, disobedient, and guilty of disorderly conduct. Our teachers and school officials need to treat us as whole human beings when they are considering discipline issues at school, rather than enforcing suspensions and exposures for simply how our behavior is perceived. My civil rights should not be determined by how individuals, teachers, perceive me. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Education and Justice released a federal guidance for improving school climate and discipline. The guidance acknowledged the profound racial disparities in school discipline and recommended schools explicitly reserve the use of out-of-school suspensions, expulsions, and alternative placements for the worst disciplinary issues that threaten school safety. Yet, the overwhelming majority of school suspensions continue to be the minor subjective infractions, such as defiance and insubordination that drive racial disparities. In other words, black and brown students continue to experience education as short of whole human beings. In 2018, the guidance was revoked by Betsy DeVos. My question to you, Senator, is will you strengthen and reissue the critical guidance?
Yes, yeah. Betsy DeVos is a disaster in many respects.
She is.
But let me just chat with you a little bit here. For a start, in many parts of this country, we are underfunding education, and that's often in black and brown neighborhoods. And one of the reasons for that, depending upon the state in which you live, is that education is dependent upon property taxes. So if I'm in a rich community, you know what, I have the money for my schools. If I'm in a poor community, I don't. So we have got to break our dependency on the property tax and make sure that every district gets adequate funding. And in fact, those districts that are hurt the most deserve more funding, which is why we're going to triple funding for Title I schools, which are the lower income schools in America. What we're also going to do, as I mentioned earlier, is improve pre-K schools significantly, make them available to all working class families. But the other thing that we want to do, and I want to throw this out to you and tell me what you think. When we talk about healthcare and we talk about education, I believe that those are human rights should be available to everybody. And a lot of people agree with that. But we've got to go a step further, and I think you raised this point, is that we need more black and brown doctors, black and brown nurses, more black and brown teachers. Because compared to the general population, it turns out there are not enough African American teachers out there. And I think what I'm hearing from you, correct me if I'm wrong, is you would like to see more black teachers in your school who can perhaps relate to you in a little bit better way than some white teachers may be coming from a different type of culture. Is that right? Yes. All right. So the way we've got to do that, it's easier said than done. But what we need to do is to make sure, A, that lower income people, often black and brown, get the ability to get the education that they need to become a teacher, right? So we've got to make public colleges and universities tuition free. We have to significantly increase Pell Grants and federal funding. I would like you to become a teacher. I really would, because we need great teachers in America. If we're going to improve America, we need the best and the brightest to go into education, go back to their own communities, all right? But to be able to get that degree that you need, you're going to need help in getting to college. You don't want to leave school with a student debt. And when you become a teacher, you want to earn a decent salary, right? Those are all things that we're working on. So our goal is not only to fund schools, but to make sure that the teachers and the staff in those schools are culturally attuned to the kids in that school. Does that make sense to you? All right, that is what our goal is.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Andrea from Rockaway Youth Action Fund, who will close us out before giving you an opportunity to tell us your final thoughts.
Good.
Hello again, Senator Sanders. So thank you for listening to the lived experiences of black and brown young people from your hometown, New York, and across the country. The young people who face these problems every day are the best people to create the solutions because we're the experts. So we would like to continue to meet with you as we continue to organize to dismantle the school-to-prison-and-deportation pipeline and to achieve the vision of police-free schools. To us, black and brown young people, safety means that we are supported and nurtured. Safety doesn't mean police and zero-tolerance policies. As we discussed today, and as we have said in the youth mandate, to end the school-to-prison-and-deportation pipeline, we need to invest in young people's education and not incarceration. We must protect the civil rights of young people and uplift public education. To reach these goals, police must be removed from schools, and the oppressive surveillance and criminalization of young people through things like metal detectors must end. Immigrant and undocumented young people must not be put in harm's way through arrest, and ICE should never be allowed to communicate with schools. And punitive discipline policies that push young people out of school must end. Instead, we should invest in restorative practices, teachers that look like us, and guidance counselors and social workers. If you commit to moving these solutions, if you become president, you could set a precedent that would impact all of our school districts across the country and have a profound impact on our lives. When I've heard you speak before, I appreciate you saying that your ideas are not that radical. Many of them are common sense, and our vision for police-free schools isn't a radical idea either. We have seen schools, like Adilka said, without police in places like Toronto, Canada, and in white communities all around the country. We just want to be in a supportive school environment that allows us to thrive. So young people are the leaders of today. We are shaping the political climate right now. We're organizing our friends, families, communities to dismantle these systems of inequality and oppression. And we will continue to fight that through the election and until all young people are free. So we hope that you'll be a part of that fight with us. Again, thank you for joining us today. And we would love to hear your closing remarks before we close out this part of the conversation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Here are my closing remarks. My closing remarks are that we are living in the most dangerous and unprecedented moment in the modern history of this country. Okay? We have a president who is not only a reactionary and a racist and a sexist, but who does not believe in democracy. So one of the things that we're fighting for right now is to maintain American democracy. If you notice, many of his friends abroad He doesn't go to countries where they are democratic. He likes authoritarian countries where people on top make all the decisions. So we're fighting for democracy. In America today, we're fighting against massive income and wealth inequality. We are fighting to end a situation where, as I said before, your generation may have a lower standard of living than your parents. And as we are focused on today, we are fighting to make sure that we have the best public school system in the world, where when you walk into school, you don't have to go through metal detectors, you don't have to be harassed by police officers, but you get the education and the counseling and the psychological help, if that's the case, that you need. And we are the richest country in the history of the world. We can afford to do that. But the political choices that we make, the priorities that we establish right now, are to give tax breaks to billionaires, to spend more money on the military than the next 10 nations combined, to give huge tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, which is destroying our planet. And that's because we have a Congress dominated by people who serve the interest of the rich and the powerful rather than working class people. So what our job is, and your generation, and you in this room are doing it, but you got to get your friends and your coworkers to stand up with you and fight to transform this country. So our goal is the best public school system in the world, where everybody in this room has the opportunity to fulfill their dreams. If you want to go to college, you should have the school to give you the education to do that, and you should not have to worry about the cost of college, because we're going to make public colleges and universities tuition free and give you the other kinds of aid you need. I want a nation where everybody can afford to go to college, not just wealthier kids. Okay? And I want a nation where when you get out of school, you're going to have a decent paying job. All right? And I want a nation in which we lead the world in combating climate change. And when we do that by implementing the Green New Deal, we're going to create many millions of good paying jobs. And right now we've been focusing on young people and education. I hope some of you, let me ask you a question if I might. How many of you are thinking of going into education and teaching? Anybody here? Fantastic. We need great teachers. All right, and I want you, when you become a teacher, to be paid adequately. And we need black teachers and we need brown teachers. So our job is to always protect the younger people, the children, who today are not getting adequate child care. So we've got to transform this country right now into a country and a government that works for all of us, not just wealthy people. And that's what I'm kind of trying to do. And in this campaign, we are reaching out to a lot of young people. You're the future of this country. You're the energy of this country. So I would hope that we can go forward together, not only beat Trump, but to transform the nation. Thank you all very much for what you're doing.